Welcome back for this second afternoon session, which is on digital policies. The title of this session is Rekindling the EU's digital productivity growth. And that is, of course, a reference to the Draghi report. We are coming near to the first anniversary of the Draghi report. Draghi alarmed us last year with his message that the EU was falling behind the US in terms of productivity growth. And he also pointed the main finger for that falling behind to the digital sector. And so inevitably that raises the question, what can the EU do to catch up again with the US in terms of digital productivity growth? And so the new commission that came in had all the commissioners in that commission had in their mission letter a clear reference to the Draghi report and the need to follow up on that and to take this to their heart. And so today we will discuss what the EU is doing in this regard and whether that's enough or whether other things or more things could be done. We have three distinguished panelists here today. We have, of course, first and foremost, European Executive Vice President, Ms. Henna Virkkunen. She has an amazingly large portfolio to handle, ranging from tech sovereignty, security and democracy, to things like digital policies and a very extensive range of other issues on freedoms, justice and democracy. Ms. Virkkunen probably doesn't need much introduction here in Brussels. She's the top digital policy chief here for the EU. She used to work also, she was a member of the European Parliament and she held several ministerial positions in Finland. Besides the top EU digital policy chief, we have a big tech US company here on the panel. Nana Louise Linde represents Microsoft. She's Vice President for European Government Affairs. She has been with Microsoft for more than 20 years. Her background is in competition lawyer, but she's held many roles at Microsoft. And then, besides big tech, we also have small tech here at the panel. We have Clark Parsons, who represents the European SMEs and startups here in this panel. Clark is the managing director of the Innovate Europe Foundation. He's the CEO also of the European Startup Network. And he sits on the advisory board of the European Startup Nations Alliance. Clark has experience himself starting up his own company. And besides that, he is the managing director of the Berlin School of Creative Leadership. So let me start with you, Ms. Virkkunen. So what can you tell us on what the Commission is actually doing in terms of living up to Draghi's exhortation that we should catch up in terms of productivity growth, especially in digital? You've launched a number of programs on AI, on regulatory simplification, and there are a number of things in the pipeline for the next couple of months. Maybe you can lift the veil a little bit and tell us what you have in mind and how you think this will contribute to productivity growth. I'll then move on to the others. We'll have a round of questions. Also, you can also ask questions on Slido, and the hashtag is digital. And towards the end of the session, we'll reserve about 10 minutes for Q&A with the audience here and with the online panel. So, Vice President, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator, dear participants and colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity to kick up our panel discussion with the keynote speech here. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here today in this Bruegel annual meeting. In the presence of Erkki Liikanen, the first Finnish commissioner. He was the first commissioner of Finland when Finland was joining European Union 30 years ago, and also was handling with digital issues in that time. So we also met earlier with Bruegel in Finland on this Europe Day, where we reflected not just what Europe is, but also what we must become. And this today's session on policy responses that can help boost Europe's digital productivity growth, it's an excellent continuation on these reflections. From the Industrial Revolution to the digital age, Europe has pioneered innovations that changed not just Europe, but also the world with it. And often this progress, this innovation happens because we are not as individual countries here, but we are acting as a Europe. We can take, for example, Galileo. 20 years ago, the only global navigation system was the American GPS. Reliable, yes, but it left us dependent on another country. So we took the bold decision to build our own system to Europe, Galileo. And we did so through collaboration between European countries. We built satellites in Italy, Germany, in UK, launched them from France, using critical control systems from Belgium and Spain with satellite operations from Luxembourg. And now, today, 30 Galileo satellites orbit the Earth. They not only reduce our reliance on foreign tech, they also surpassed it, providing the world's most accurate positioning system, precise down to just 20 centimeters. So today, your phones, your car, even rescue teams, they are using Galileo every day. No single European nation could have built it alone. But together, Europe didn't just keep up, it excelled. And this is just one example of what Europe can achieve when we come together. And we need to use this strength. We know that we have highly innovative companies in the European Union and also very active startup scene. But to be competitive, we need to also build infrastructure, scale up, strengthen our internal market, and most importantly, boost our productivity in tech. Today, we know that the key driver of the rising EU-US productivity gap is digital tech, like it was mentioned already by the moderator. If you strip out the main ICT sectors, Europe's productivity has broadly been at the same level than productivity in the US. And it matters. About 70% of our GDP per capita gap with the US is explained by the lower productivity. In addition, we are increasingly dependent on non-European companies providing us very crucial parts of our tech markets, such as cloud, processors, and of course, AI. That's why we want to strengthen Europe. We are doing so by taking actions in AI, by simplifying our rulebook, by strengthening our sovereignty, and also by planning for the future. One of the most important topics for competitiveness right now is AI. The challenge is that it's an evolving field with very constant movement. That is why we in the EU have to have a very dedicated approach. We want to become an AI continent. And dear participants, we have all the building blocks needed to Europe to be successful in this AI race. It's good to know that we have very strong research community in the European Union. We have 30% more researchers on AI than US is having per capita, 3 times more than China. We have also very attractive startups in this field. There is 7,000 startups in the European Union who is developing AI. And I have had a chance to talk to some of the brightest minds in AI in the world, and they agree that we can do this in Europe. So the priority for me and this commission is to make Europe the best place in the world to do research, to start innovative companies, and also to succeed in AI. And that is why in our AI Continent Action Plan, we focus not only to infrastructure and data, but also on AI adoption, skills and talent, minimizing regulatory burden and making sure our digital regulation is implemented also successfully. We will make sure that Europe is the most attractive continent for building and scaling AI. Firstly, one of the most important ways we can do this is to support public-private infrastructure in AI. In the last few months, I visited new AI factories around Europe. And these AI factories are yet another example of the European innovative spirit. We have taken some of the most powerful supercomputers in the world and built an ecosystem of companies, researchers, and support services around them. And their use is free for startups and for small and medium-sized companies. Like I said, we have very active startup community when it comes to AI. We have big amount of researchers, but one of the main obstacles is that they are lacking access to computing capacity to develop AI systems. And that's why we are creating our AI factories. And now we have 13 AI factories operational across Europe. And we are looking to complement this with a few so-called AI gigafactories with even more computing power for even more powerful AI models. So these gigafactories, they will be 4 times more powerful than the biggest AI factories. And we have already faced strong interest in these gigafactories with more than 70 expressions of interest in 16 member states across 60 different sites. So by end of this year, we will launch the official call for proposals for these first 4 to 5 gigafactories, which would represent an investment on around 20 billion. But of course, infrastructure is not everything. If AI is the engine driving progress, then data is the fuel. That brings me to the second part of our strategy. To fully harness the power of AI, Europe must ensure seamless access to high quality and structured data. The European Commission will launch a dedicated data union strategy in the coming months to better align data policies with the needs of businesses, the public sector and society, while fostering a trustworthy environment for data sharing. Because often when we are asking from the industries what is the main obstacle, why they are not using more AI, why they are not more developing AI, often data and data rules are mentioned that they are too complicated, and we want to really support them in this exercise. We are also going to publish a dedicated Cloud and AI Development Act, which will target in tripling Europe's data center capacity over the next 5-7 years. And this act will also target stimulating private investments in data centers. And thirdly, to link AI-related EU instruments, we will also publish an Apply AI strategy in the coming weeks. And this will serve as a blueprint for the adoption of AI in strategic EU sectors. For example, it will link existing AI skills policies with existing support instruments, such as the AI factories and the European Digital Innovation Hubs. And this Apply AI strategy will be adopted in the coming weeks. And fourth, the AI Continent Action Plan focuses on strengthening AI skills and talent. To keep up with the increasing global demand for AI-related expertise, EU needs to enlarge our AI talent pool. An important action will be the AI Skills Academy, which will be a platform for supporting and developing educational and training schemes on AI. Dear participants, the EU is often criticized that we are too bureaucratic. We are especially too bureaucratic and slow when it comes to SMEs. And this message is received. The fifth pillar of the AI Continent Action Plan focuses on measures minimizing regulatory burden and guaranteeing the successful implementation on digital regulations. We are working to cut red tape and unnecessary administrative burden. That is why we are undertaking an ambitious simplification of our digital rulebook to reduce administrative burden. As a part of our efforts to boost businesses, we are also soon going to introduce the EU Business Wallet for the companies. And these wallets will help our companies to handle their reporting and compliance duties vis-à-vis public authorities in member states in the same, simpler manner. Dear audience, when we are talking about digital productivity growth, we must also look at other future challenges, opportunities, possibilities here. In addition to AI, I believe we will have a quantum revolution in the coming years, and we want to be ready for that. Quantum technologies, they are going to disrupt many sectors, just like AI is doing now. It will have a huge impact on our lives. And often we are saying that Europe is lagging behind of different technologies or digitalization, but quantum is something we know that we are very strong. We are not lagging behind here. In the EU, we want to take a leading role also in the future when it comes to quantum. We are funding a very wide range of projects now to build the foundations to achieve excellence in quantum technologies in Europe. And we have already reached a key milestone in quantum through our quantum strategy that was adopted in July. This is supported by our most talented scientists and technology experts in Europe. The goal of the strategy is to accelerate our quantum computing infrastructure, establish also communication networks, and support the integration of quantum to our most critical sectors of society. And we are already deploying the first European quantum computers right now. So we are also working to produce European-made quantum chips in the future. Together, all these elements make up our plan to true tech, to support our productivity and make Europe more competitive. But we also want to build secure Europe. To do that, we must ensure also that Europe is technologically sovereign. We can take here example from semiconductors, because we know that semiconductor technology is something that is very vital in building of AI chips, and semiconductors has an incredible complex supply chain, global supply chain. Each chips used today, they travel an average 50,000 kilometers before reaching its end user, and that is more than traveling around the entire globe. Chips are not only important because of their economic value, but also because they are foundational for our digital way of life, from AI to digital platforms, to cloud services, to telecom providers. Hence, our vulnerability in this sector is a serious threat to our economic security, and that is why we have introduced the European Chips Act, building resilience in this sector. But tailoring our industry to build the next generation chips does not happen overnight. It takes dedicated effort and focus. And that's why we are also now preparing our Chips Act 2 to make sure that in the future we are also able to design and manufacture also the most advanced chips in the European Union. We cannot talk about resilience and tech sovereignty without also mentioning connectivity here and also the telecom sector. We know that this is very critical component for Europe's competitiveness and resilience. We need to modernize our legal framework for digital networks, and we are doing that currently. We are going to publish a new Digital Networks Act, which will help build a more integrated single market here for connectivity. And this is critical to stay competitive and reduce dependencies on third countries, because we know that good connections, modern infrastructure is very much basis, of course, for all the other innovations and economic activities. This Digital Networks Act will help also reduce our administrative burden and compliance costs for businesses. And it will also generally target better digital connectivity for customers, ensuring that our citizens and businesses, they have great access to digital services. So, dear moderator and participants, I want to underline that Europe is already making substantial progress when it comes to digitalization and technological sovereignty. And look at the overwhelming expression of interest of our upcoming AI gigafactories. It really shows also that all our key industries and businesses, they are fully committed also to invest and innovate in Europe. And they are committed to build a stronger future economy together. And as we build our European approach, we will strengthen also our innovative spirit, our productivity drive, and our passion to deliver the best for the European future.
Thank you very much for this very comprehensive overview of all the actions and activities that the Commission has been undertaking to respond to the Draghi challenge. If I may follow up with just one quick follow-up question. You have been talking a lot about gigafactories, and the European Commission has been very active in making finance available to build these gigafactories. You spoke about 20 billion euros. Bruegel is an economic think tank, and we think about this in economic terms. And then, to me, the question comes up, why do we need to subsidize these gigafactories with taxpayer money? After all, the US and US companies have built up these cloud computing and AI computing infrastructures without subsidies. So why in Europe do we need a subsidy for that?
In Europe, we are very good often when it comes to public funding of different projects, but we are not so good when it comes to private funding. And this is, of course, something that we are also working now in the European Commission. And when it comes to gigafactories, the idea is really to build a public-private partnership around this. There will still be use for like public use of these infrastructures because the researchers, they need also that kind of infrastructure. But more, of course, the idea is now to have that kind of consortiums where the industry is playing a very important role. And the private funding is, of course, playing a bigger role here, not so much the public funding. And it was also very interesting, of course, to see when we had the first call for interest that there was so active participation from all our key industries that they were willing to invest and participate to these gigafactories because they also need that kind of computing capacity in the future when they want to develop AI and use AI more in their businesses. So the idea is really to build public-private partnerships, not only like to support with the public funding that kind of infrastructures.
Okay, so public-private partnerships with private companies also. Let me pass on to a representative of Microsoft, Nana Louise. I presume Microsoft is also very interested in these partnerships with European companies. Microsoft has, of course, built up extensive infrastructure, cloud computing and AI in Europe. How does Microsoft look at this? You have done this on a commercial basis so far. Now you get the possibility to do partnerships with public institutions. How do you look at this? Is that an opportunity for Microsoft? Well, we would like to hear your views on this whole AI agenda.
First of all, thank you for having me. Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at the infrastructure, you're right. Microsoft has invested heavily in AI infrastructure. The past 18 months, we invested almost 20 billion just in Europe. And we have committed to raise our capacity with 40% over the coming years. There is no lack of infrastructure, and actually everyone are allowed to use this infrastructure. We have decided to make it open, accessible on fair terms for anyone who wants to use it, competitors, open source, whoever wants to use it. I do understand that there are some political reasons why we want to invest as Europe in European infrastructure. But it's just important to understand that there's not a lack of infrastructure. It's a big investment for a company like Microsoft, and it comes with great risk, because if nobody's using it, it's not a good investment. So, of course, you know, as a private company, to decide to make these investments, this was something that we started many years ago. When we first started to talk about AI, we launched our responsible AI principles 7 years ago, when we started to develop AI and started our collaboration with OpenAI. So these investments have been coming over many years. And I think actually, you know, even if Europe wants to invest in their own infrastructure, and we are also part of some of the consortiums of these gigafactories. So you know, I think it is a very good initiative. But these are very expensive, and they require also a lot of expertise, of course. So I think, and they will take maybe 7-9 years until they are fully up to the same level as those that the American hyperscalers have built now. So I think at least until they are built and operational, we should make sure that we find a way to collaborate to make sure that we can use AI in Europe and empower our customers in Europe to get the best out of this new technology.
If you say that there's no lack of infrastructure in Europe and that your company has been investing already a lot in that, why then, in your view, is it so that Europe is running behind in developing AI models? Microsoft has a strong partnership with OpenAI, one of the leading firms in AI model development. But my understanding is that virtually all these models are trained in the US and very little of that, or hardly any, in the EU. Why is that so? If it's not the lack of infrastructure, is it regulatory obstacles? Is it something else?
I think both you alluded to some of the challenges that Europe has had, and I think the Draghi report lays it out. You know, it's about some structural issues, maybe too complicated, unclear regulation, lack of investments, and that unclarity in the regulation makes it, you know, less likely that some people want to make these very or companies want to make these very expensive investments, but you know they're looking into that now. So I think that's a positive. Can I just say that you know, there's a lot of geopolitical volatility, and you know, a company like Microsoft, we would like to partner with Europe on whatever they want to achieve. And whether they want to build their own infrastructure, whether they want to upskill the population, I think that we bring something that can be helpful in that process. And we are very committed to Europe. Europe is very important to us. It's one of our most important markets. Actually, it is the most important market outside of the US. That's also why we have launched these 5 European commitments that we talked about before we entered. Which is hopefully addresses some of the concerns here around sovereignty, data privacy, cybersecurity, digital continuation. We have provided a digital guarantee so that if we are ever asked to stop our services, we have a copy of our source code in Switzerland, and we have European companies who can take over and continue our services. So we've done different things to address some of the concerns here.
Okay. Let me go on to Clark. Clark, you heard what the previous speaker said. Do you think that European startups are held back by lack of infrastructure or by regulatory concerns? The Draghi report clearly said that we have a thriving startup world in Europe. We have many creative and inventive people, but often passing from the startup to the start-through to the scale-up and growing in scale is an issue. Is that because of regulatory burdens in Europe, regulatory compliance costs that are too high, or are there other issues? If you would be in Ms. Virkunen's place, how would you address Draghi's challenge with European policies?
More money.
More taxpayer money.
Yeah, more money. So it's a great success story. Europe now produces 3.5 trillion in value from its startups. That's the current enterprise value. It's amazing. And we can talk about which regulations are holding people back, and I'd love to get into the infrastructure debate too, but the key thing that we're fighting for right now and are excited about with the startup and scale-up strategy are 2 topics, 28th regime and capital markets union. I'll tell you a story of 3 Nordic startups just to illustrate it. The most fastest growing software company in the world right now is Swedish. They're Lovable AI. They're up to 100 million annual revenue in a couple of months. They have a tiny team. They're sitting in Stockholm. Swedish founder, Swedish angels, I know some of them. They're incorporated in Delaware. Kind of tells you all you need to know. We don't have a single market for startups right now. Only 18% of our capital, or our venture capital, is cross-border. So if you're not lucky enough to be in one of the centers, you're usually looking to the US anyway to flip to a Delaware Inc. Why? Founders can't wait, for the agenda to get enacted. They're moving fast. So they're going to go where the capital is and where the customers are. So for a lot of enterprise European companies, they're going to flip to the US anyway because they can get to the customers faster, but especially the capital. It's almost impossible for a Swedish angel to invest in a Portuguese startup digitally right now if they heard a pitch on Zoom. And you've heard the nightmares about German notaries. So the 28th regime can't come fast enough. That's extremely important, not just because we talk about scaling across borders, it's investing across borders. There's so much capital in Europe that could be mobilized if we would let it be mobilized through a 28th regime. For those unfamiliar with it, it would be one legal entity that could work all across Europe and you could invest in it and off it goes. It's sort of Schengen for startups. So that's a huge thing. Another startup that I would mention, another Swedish company, Klarna, just announced today they're doing their IPO in the US. So we don't have the capital markets that we need. London is now losing to Frankfurt, of all places. For IPOs, we have to do a lot of work. How do we fix this? There's about a 30 billion gap annually right now in startup financing, and Deal Room just dropped a report today showing, once again, if our pension funds would just invest 2% of their assets under management, we would have no gap and we would finance everything. So the gap, the amount that European tech needs to be fully funded from Europe is 0.2% of GDP. We're talking about 5% for defense. We spend 3 point something, I think, on energy. A tiny fraction, if we could divert that into the tech ecosystem, would massively close the gap. Why is this all important? I mean, you would say, hey, if the money comes from somewhere, who cares? But, I mean, think about the knock-on effects of this. If the pension funds and universities in the US are getting all the upside from our talent, then those economies are getting all the upside. Those retirees are getting all of the upside. And there's been a lot of reports that have shown that if a founder flips to the US, their next company will be a US company, et cetera, et cetera. So we're the greatest charity in the world. We're training incredible founders and researchers and scientists, and then we let American companies harvest them because we have no gap relatively in the startup phase. It's the scale-up phase where we're massively outspent. Most European startups, actually a majority of European startups in the scale-up phase, get more money from the US than their own country. This is where our gap is, and we have to work on it. We need bigger funds, and that's going to be from the pension funds to mobilize our own private capital.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think the good news is really that we have very strong foundation in the European Union where we look that we have very strong research and science in the European Union, and also how much we have very promising startups in the European Union, because often annually more startups, they are established in the European Union than in USA. But then when we look the scale up part, it's problematic in the European Union because we are lacking single market and access to finance. It's the main obstacle for many of our startups. So only 8% of the global startups, they are in the European Union, and more than 60% in Northern America. So it tells that our startups often they have to move to USA to scale up their business. So that's why it's so important that we are working now with the Savings and Investments Union to make sure also that we have better access to capital for our promising startups and for our industries. And like I said, like it was said, we have a lot of money in the European Union. In fact, our households, they have more than 10 trillion in the savings accounts in the banks. So it's also something in the European culture, of course, that we have to change, that also our households and families, they would like to invest part of their savings, not only to put them to savings accounts, because it would benefit very much our startups and our industry, of course, if we could use this for the investments which are needed. But I see also that access to financing, it's one of the main obstacles for our promising startups, and of course lack of the single market often, that we still have too many barriers between the member states, and for some companies also our very, very slow authorization processes. If they have that kind of products which needs authorization to enter to the markets, often it can take years in the European Union that you can access to markets with the new materials or products. So Europe has to become much, much faster and simpler and easier for the businesses.
Yeah. So, Clark, you say a lot more money is needed, private sector money, capital markets and the savings union. Fortunately, Capital Markets Union is not part of your portfolio. There's your colleagues who have to deal with that. We've tried in the EU for many years already to get to that point. Hopefully we'll get there under this college. But over the last half a year especially, I would say, another dimension has slipped into this debate, which is the geostrategic dimension that you mentioned, the sovereignty part. We do not want to depend 100% from the US or from China or from anybody else. We want to master our supply chain here in Europe. Now, we can build our own gigafactories or cloud computing infrastructure. We'll still probably have to buy NVIDIA chips to put in that hardware. So it's hard to see how Europe in the foreseeable future could become independent in that way. But isn't this sovereignty debate somewhat standing in juxtaposition against our competitiveness debate? And I mean, if we if we fold back our efforts into the European Union, inevitably things are going to get a little bit more expensive, and our choice of suppliers is going to be more limited. Don't you think that too much emphasis on sovereignty will reduce our competitiveness rather than increase it? Maybe you have a first view on that?
Yes, I think it's also very important to clarify that what we mean with the sovereignty. I see that it very much means also that we can choose that with who and how we are cooperating, that we are not dependent on one country or one company when it comes to some very critical sectors or services. So that the European Union should have always our own capacity in certain important fields, but also that we have also like-minded, trusted partners to work with. So we don't see that we can be competitive alone. So nobody can't be competitive alone, and we don't want to isolate ourselves. So we see that it's important that we have certain capacity ourselves, but then we have also good partnerships all over the world to make sure that we have very strong value chains also with them, and we have security of supply when it comes to very critical sectors. And that's why we are working very closely with like-minded countries. For example, when it comes to digital, we have digital partnerships with Japan, with Singapore, with Korea, with Canada, with India. We have also trade and technology council. We are working on them. And of course, with the UK, also now we have good discussions how we can also cooperate more when it comes to digital. So, and of course, USA I didn't mention, but of course they are the most important partner when it comes to technology and security for us. So in the same time, when we want to build up our own capacities when it comes to critical sectors, we also say that it's important to have partners in these fields. Nobody can't be competitive alone.
I think you make a very important point around what does it mean to be sovereign? Because I hear often sovereign equals a pure European tech stack. But being sovereign, if you are not secure, for example, if that European company doesn't provide the same security as, for example, an American provider, then are you more sovereign? If you are more vulnerable to cyber attacks from Russia, China, and North Korea. So I think it's important to think about how can we be sovereign without equal it with a European tech stack? We could have a tech stack that we have some principles around. It has to be respecting data privacy. It has to be transparent. It has to be open. It has to be sustainable. You know, all these principles, fundamental Western values that this... and then for the infrastructure, which will take time to build and be very expensive, make sure that this infrastructure that is here and that we need to use here and now is open, so everyone can use it, so that we can start. I mean, Microsoft's data centers, there's running 1,800 AI models at the moment. And some of it is competitors, some of it is startups, scale-ups. So 1,800 models at the moment, many of them are European. But I like also your positive tone, because we have a lot of strength here in Europe. We have a lot to build on. We have strong domains like our health sector, our machine tools, chemicals, really strong sectors that if we infuse with AI, that's where we get the productivity gain. And then hopefully we can put a lot of money into our startups and invest there, because I like the work that you're doing, and I completely agree what you said, that we need money for the startups.
If I can respond, thank you very much. I agree totally. I would like to talk about maybe just about this infrastructure question or this sovereignty question, because we're supporters of the Eurostack movement, which is not 100% European. We couldn't even rip Huawei out of Deutsche Telekom's network. So it's going to take a long time. Let's face it, we're a colony. I'm an American. I've been using Microsoft 40 years. We've let ourselves become a technological colony of the US. Arteris did a study in May. We send about $264 billion per year across the Atlantic to US companies for cloud and IT services. Well-earned money, no begrudging. Microsoft's not evil in that regard. They've built their market share fair and square. Of course, if you send $260 billion across the Atlantic every year, and 20 or 30 come back every year on ribbon cuttings for data centers, we only have ourselves to blame. We have built Microsoft with our money, also with our public money. 83% of our enterprises are using US tech in their stack. What we're asking for is, instead of just building data centers, great, but Microsoft isn't giant because they built data centers. They've built data centers because they're giant. So let's not put the cart before the horse. You need to get to the service layer. You need the customers. If we would start buying European in the mix, which, by the way, a lot of European governments and private enterprises, are now working on an exit strategy, because a few years ago this wouldn't have been a debate about geopolitics. But we've now seen how erpressbar in German, how blackmailable we are with our tech dependency. And so there is a need to get some choice and some flexibility and a little bit of Europeanness into our tech stack. That's what it's all about. There is an entire universe of providers in Europe ready to offer you everything you want. Last night in Brussels, the state of Schleswig-Holstein did a seminar about how they've gone independent with open source and with European providers. It's not rocket science. I got here to Europe 25 years ago. The Sabit Hall was full of European tech companies doing your on-prem tech stack. I mean, we've forgotten the fact that we had our own IT infrastructure in Europe for a long time before we slowly ceded this market share to the main hyperscalers.
But if I may challenge you a little bit, both of you a little bit on that. Microsoft is one of the dominant players in the cloud services market. And most importantly, it dominates the cloud services software platform. And so there is no real alternative for that. You can move to Linux, open source software, but that has not really made much of an inroad. It has reached the point where even Google has launched a competition case against Microsoft for allegedly uncompetitive behavior in this Microsoft's server software layer. So we've discussed this before, Clark. You say, well, there are European alternatives, but I question, are there European alternatives? Can we solve this through competition policy? Can we solve this through other means? I don't see how we can break through that US dominance.
I mean, the problem is, it seems so big, it's sort of like climate change. Where do I start? Competition policy alone is never going to solve it. This was kind of the illusion in Brussels a long time. Like, if we just regulate and DSA and DMA will somehow magically give us a competitive landscape. It's a piece. It's important. I mean, bundling and all of these tools of the trade to lock down a market are real, and they are an important part of the toolbox. Also with the DMA, we saw it's been a great week for the status quo. Washington just killed the Google deal, sealing. A monopolist was declared stay a monopolist. So we have a long way to go. But I'm just here to tell you there is a vibrant ecosystem out there in Europe waiting for the customers to come and ready. And we're talking to a lot of giant enterprises who are quite interested to find a way to diversify that tech stack.
Yeah, that is the reason why we also adopted Digital Markets Act a little bit more than 1 year ago. It came into the force, and the idea is really much to make sure that the big gatekeepers, that they are not blocking access to markets or misuse their very dominant market position to block new innovations. And now we are implementing this Digital Markets Act all the time to make sure that we have also level playing field and also access to markets for the smaller players and SMEs. But we have many alternatives also, like it was said, we have a lot of small companies also in the markets, and it's important that we are also making them more visible, their services, because often there is not enough knowledge in the companies who are buying the services, that there is also alternatives. And I think also that the public procurement could make a bigger role here, because we know that via public procurement we could also boost new innovations and also really support our startups and SMEs to grow their market share. So we should use this tool also much more actively, and because our governments, European Commission, municipalities, they are big customers of ICT services. So I think it has a big meaning for our innovations and for our SMEs what kind of services they are buying.
Yeah, you just mentioned the DMA, but just today the news came out that the European Commission is holding back on fines in competition against US companies, against Google, for fear of retaliation by the US administration in the trade policy domain. How do you square that with Europe pushing forward with the DMA and with limiting the monopolistic market power of these US companies?
We have said all the time during this discussion that we are fully committed, of course, to implement and enforce our rules when it comes to Digital Markets Act and Digital Service Act. And we know that there is several investigations going on against these big gatekeepers and big online platforms. And always investigations, they take some time when we are gathering the evidence also and information, and when we have everything what is needed, we also make the decisions. And these are very, I think, very good and fair rules that we have under Digital Markets Act and Digital Service Act, because they are same rules for everybody. So everybody who is doing business in the European Union, they have to respect the same rules. So European companies, USA companies, Chinese companies, everybody has the same rules. And the main principle is to make sure that we have fair and safe and democratic environment also in digital businesses.
I just want to make one comment. First of all, the cloud market is very competitive and very dynamic, and there are alternatives. And for the DMA, just want to make the point that we've always been supportive of the DMA. We don't confuse it with anything else than a regulation that has the right purpose, and the same with the DSA. Just want to make that point. And I'm a little bit sad when it comes to, US against EU, because I think there's so many ways that we can work together to make Europe that AI continent. I think we need each other. We need some of the expertise that we bring, some of the money that we bring, and we have committed to invest even more. And, another good example of how we need each other, there's plenty of big European tech companies who have contacted me and said, we are successful because we are collaborating with you and makes us more competitive internationally. One example, SAP, they work with Microsoft, and that is part of their success story. So if we want to have these big European tech companies, I think part of the way to do that is through collaboration. We also have a lot of skilling commitments in Europe. Every time we launch a new data center, we commit to a comprehensive skilling programs with local skilling partners in that country. I want to mention one more thing that you mentioned in your intro, namely quantum. Because often we are so focused on what we don't have. that we lose sight of all our strength and what's the next big thing. And quantum is really an area where Europe is super strong. In Denmark, we are now in collaboration with Danish companies, Novo Nordisk, Atom, and IFO, building the world's biggest, most powerful quantum computer. We decided to do that in Europe, in Denmark, because there's an expertise there and great European companies to work with. That's very exciting. We should really double down and see, how can we channel more of our investments to where it can really make a difference for Europe's competitiveness. And this is one area. I think adoption and diffusion is another one where we really can invest for competitiveness.
Quick follow-up on quantum, maybe?
Very quick, because I would like to open the debate.
I think it's great that we're talking about it. In most of the quantum technologies, we're massively outspent by the U.S. About 95%, I think, of all funding for most of the photonic, primary, the stuff that got out first, is U.S. funding. We still have a chance on neutral atoms. I think about a third of the funding is European. They came out of Max Planck, for instance. So we're going to have to pick our battles in quantum, because there's a lot of competing technologies, and some of the trains have already left the station in terms of the financing and which companies are going to win the race. But we still have a chance. We're putting out a study next month on this. Europe still has a chance in this area, but we're going to have to be really smart about how we deploy our capital, because we have the ideas, but we're being massively outspent on the capital side in the US.
Okay, I think it's time to open up the debate a bit to the floor and to the online audience. Let me just pick one question from the online audience that I think relates very well to what we were just discussing. We were talking about 20 billion European Commission money being invested in AI infrastructure. But compared to what's going on in the US and OpenAI's Stargate project, $500 billion, 20 billion is peanuts. So how could we combine, let's say, the financing power of big US firms with the possibilities to invest in Europe? Stargate, OpenAI and the Stargate project is starting a big project in Norway with co-financing from some independent private wealth funds and private equity funds. So they didn't wait for capital markets union to happen. They found the money somewhere in the world. There's plenty of money floating around. So how do you think we can overcome this, this gap between our financial shooting power and what's really required to catch up?
This 20 billion is something that we see that is needed if we want to build 4 to 5 gigafactories. But when we had this call for interest that was closing in June, those participants who were expressing their interest, they were announcing that they are planning to invest more than 200 billion. So of course, this was not binding call yet, but anyway, it seems that the industry is ready to invest to these infrastructures as well.
I also don't hear you say that this should be the full infrastructure in Europe. Of course, there will still be room, I hope, for foreign investments as well. But you're looking for an alternative, so that there's an alternative route. But in addition to that, there will be investments from American companies. So I'm very confident that we'll have the infrastructure we need.
If I can I praise Microsoft for a second? They did something European companies never do. They told a fusion startup, "We'll buy your power in 2028. So go build the plant." Yeah. Okay. So in general, I think the European corporates need to step up. The Commission is doing a great job of trying to correct market failures and correct our lack of investment for 20 years in this infrastructure. We're paying the price for the fact that we didn't invest ourselves at the private sector and the public sector. So now we're sitting there saying, oh my gosh, we don't have the money for all these gigafactories and the AI infrastructure. We're paying the bill for the fact that Angela Merkel could have literally been paid to issue debt 15 years ago to invest and didn't.
Sorry, can I turn to the floor? I'm sure we can debate this for a long time. I'll take 2 or 3 questions from over there, Mr. Wunsch, and behind you, and over there.
No, thank you very much. I mean, obviously we are lagging behind. We'd probably be number 3 at best in terms of AI in Europe. As an economist, I get my question is, to what extent does it matter? I mean, we were never competitive in producing mainframes, and then they disappeared. We were never competitive in producing PCs. They became a commodity. And there are 2 views of the world. I mean, if you see the massive investments of the Magnificent Seven or some of them in the AI sphere, it looks like the first mover advantage is going to be huge, because otherwise you wouldn't invest as much. But then you have the other part of the debate, which is, you know, DeepSeek is only 6 months behind. If we are only 6 months behind or a year behind, as we are anywhere are not moving as fast as the US, I mean, we have a different culture, that's not a big deal. I would be interested in your views on this matter. As much as I believe there is a first mover advantage with the cloud and lock-in is real, I don't know about AI. And it might be that part of the thing is that there is a first mover advantage for the large language models, but many people also say the value, and a big part of the value will be in the smaller, more specialized, bespoke models. I guess it's also the CEO of Infosys who said that. So your views on that would be interesting.
Okay. Can you pass the microphone behind you?
Hi, Rashid Baxter from Global Competition Review. When Burton brought up the ad tech report, you didn't deny that that was the, apologies, my question is for you, Hanno. You didn't deny that that was the case, that that happened as was reported on Monday evening. Therefore, if European rule of law, antitrust rules, are subject to trade negotiations, then how can tech sovereignty have any meaning if rule of law is subject to trade pressure? And following from that, can you at this stage guarantee that Google's DMA investigation, in light of the report on Monday, is not subject to any trade concerns, given that Oliver Bethel at Google in August was projecting a position of failure in reaching a conclusion? That would be my question.
We had one more question over there.
Okay, thank you. Jussi Mäkinen from Technology Industries of Finland. I remember hearing when someone said that an act is not an answer to everything, but perhaps that leads me to the question that pretty many of these projects are actually top-down, coming from the Commission towards the industry. But then looking at the Digital Decade report, 13.5% of European companies are using AI, and roughly 1/3 data analytics. So what would be the role of the European industries in creating that demand, which is the first and quite necessary prerequisite for the European digital industries to grow? Thank you.
Panel, feel free to answer these questions.
I think the second is for you, but I'm happy to answer 1 and 3.
Yeah, okay. I can start. Like I said, we will fully, of course, enforce and implement our legislation and rules in the European Union. That's for sure. And when it comes to why it's important that we have our own capacities in AI, for example, we see that there's some very critical technologies like AI, quantum, or semiconductors, where it's important that we have our own capacity, because those areas, countries, companies who has the power here, they have very much economic power, and nowadays it's also part of the security, economic security, but also our security, that we are also capable when it comes to critical technologies. And that's why we see that it's important that Europe is also competitive and we have our own capabilities when it comes to these critical technologies. But where we can be very competitive on AI, we really see that we have very strong industrial base in the European Union, like it was mentioned, for example, pharma, energy, automotive industry. And when we are combining our AI developers with these traditional industries and also with our public sector and especially health sector, we can be much more productive than we are today. And that's why we are now working with our Apply AI strategy, because we want to really now identify the obstacles about why our public sector or different industries, why they are not uptaking AI more, and how we could support them from the European Union level. So is it a lack of knowledge, or is it because our rules and regulation? And of course, data is something that is identified often, that we have too complicated data rules, and that's why we are now working also with our data union strategy to make it simpler and easier also for the AI developers to access to data and apply AI.
Would you also have something to say on the question of letting competition policy being held hostage by trade policy?
I said that we will fully enforce our rules and legislation in the European Union.
Okay.
And maybe, because if this is, we are like going to, I think, finalize the discussion after that. So I would like to also add one positive remark here when it comes to our technological sovereignty and competitiveness, because we see that our member states, they are now investing heavily to defense industries. And I think this is also very good news for our technologies, because we know that the technologies are going very much hand in hand with the defense industry. And this also means that we will have big boost to our technologies in the coming years.
No, I think it was very interesting that you referred to history, because we can often learn a lot from history, and you're asking if the train has already left the station, and relating also a little bit to your question. Made me think about a book, one of the most important technology book that was written last year by an economist, Jeffrey Ding. He's been looking at the different technology revolutions and looked at, which countries really benefited from those revolutions. It's called Technology and the Rise of Great Powers: How Diffusion Shapes Economic Competition. His point is that when you're looking at these different technology revolutions, it's not so important who invented the technology. So, for example, electricity. It's not so important who invented electricity. It's not also so important who provided and built the infrastructure, so the power plants, equally the data centers. That is also not actually really important for the competitiveness and for the economic success. What really matters is which country manage to adopt and diffuse the technology into every part of the economy. So uptake the technology, so with electricity, for example, infuse the technology, build new products, the blender, the vacuum cleaner, the grass clipper, whatever, infuse that technology. It's a little bit the same with AI. There's so much opportunity still in Europe to, we have so many strong domains. In pharmaceutical, for example, they are now using AI to look at all the data they have of how their medicine is working and getting new insights that, okay, this is actually giving a huge leap in our research and development of our products, that we can compete even better internationally. So lots of hope for Europe.
Mark, you have the last word.
Yeah, well, you just described wonderfully China's AI strategy, the diffusion. I mean, they've decided AI is a loss leader. They're going to open source it and use it across the entire economy, which is why they're really potentially ready to leapfrog us all. If you see the models they're putting out and the relatively low cost, and the fact that they're not trying to capture all the value with one or two companies at AI, but use it across the entire economy. So it's quite extraordinary. And you had a really great question you're raising about why do we even care about all this? To me, it's sort of the difference between prosperity and this sort of competitiveness sovereignty debate. If we all worked for Microsoft and Google in Europe, we'd be quite prosperous, but we wouldn't have any sovereignty or competitiveness. And you rightly point out this point with Ukraine. I think the future of Europe's technological playing or not is going to, in some ways, be decided on the battlefields of Ukraine. It's the most innovative place in the world right now in defense technology. You can read a recent New Yorker article that went to Tel Aviv and Washington and Ukraine and sees that nobody's ready to fight the type of war the Russians and the Ukrainians are fighting. It's incredible. And it's not just the way that they're innovating within about a 2-week cycle to get new weapons on the battlefield. They've turned their entire society upside down for speed. Also civil society. It's extraordinary. We have so much to learn from it. And a lot of our technological future can be tied to how we embrace Ukraine, how we tie our primes and our startups. As President von der Leyen recently said before the NATO summit, we have to get the startups and the primes working together, and we have to get military and civil working together. That's really a key to unlocking Europe's competitiveness, but also especially sovereignty, even on the battlefield.
Thank you very much, dear panelists, for this debate. With this, I think we're going to close this session. Thank you very much for the audience. And have a nice afternoon, everybody.